Hello everybody and welcome to the Literary Apostate segment on the Apostate Coalition channel. My name is Kay. I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I left the religion about 3 years ago and have since made it my mission to help others through their deconstruction journey. For this month's segment, I want to go ahead and start out with a book that is very dear and near to me. But I also want to point out that if you have any recommendations for books that helped you through your deconstruction journey or that you would like reviewed on this channel, please go ahead and leave a comment down below and I'll go ahead and get to it. Now let's get right into the book for this segment. When I left my religion about 3 years ago, I picked up this book on accident. This is not a book that I planned on reading at all. It came from a recommendation from someone I knew in a book club. They didn't even think about recommending it to me for deconstruction purposes, but it landed on my lap by accident. I was disfellowshipped. I had been disfellowshipped for about 6 months, and I was still mentally in when it came to my beliefs and my religion. This book really helped me break all that down and understand what it is that I truly believed in, and it helped me to realize that I was in a cult. This segment's book is called Educated by Tara Westover. She is a former FLDS Mormon who grew up on a mountain in Idaho with survivalist parents. She decides at the age of 17 that she wants to go to school for the very first time in her life, having not received any education at all. The reason I'm bringing this book first is because I often get asked, what books do you recommend for someone who is trying to wake up a family member or a friend? This is my book. If you are trying to wake up anyone who is not Mormon, this book mentions Mormonism, so it will not work for someone who is Mormon. But it might work for someone who is of another denomination and or religion. It woke me up as a Jehovah's Witness. I would recommend it because it makes the parallels very clear between the FLDS cult and whatever cult you're in, because it doesn't point out specifics other than some of the tactics and things that we already know from the Bible model without really pointing them out as a cult. Halfway through this book, I knew for a fact I had grown up in a cult. So I highly recommend that you allow your Jehovah's Witness friend, your Seventh-day Adventist friend, your Amish friend to read this book and make those parallel connections themselves. So let's go ahead and get into some of those parallels. The first one, as the book title states, is education. Jehovah's Witnesses and other religions are very hesitant of allowing their children to be educated, not just by public school systems, but also through higher education and university learning. In this book, we learn that Tara, the main character and the author of the book, did not go to school as a child. In fact, she was well trained to tell other people that she did school at home, by which she meant that she would grab a book and run her fingers through the spine of the book, and that would count as one page. And then she would go to the next page and do the same thing. That was her doing school. No one taught Tara or her siblings how to educate themselves, how to read and analyze information properly, how to really do any kind of math or history or science lessons, or really understand some of the things that we as public school students take for granted. The parallel with my own religion, being Jehovah's Witnesses, is that Jehovah's Witnesses also do not trust the public school system, often homeschooling their own children due to bad association. Now, Tara didn't go to school not due to bad association, but because of distrust of government. Jehovah's Witnesses, it could be argued that they also distrust the government, but perhaps not to the extent that Tara's parents did. It's more so that they believe that children at a public school would be a bad influence on their own children, and therefore they choose not to send them to those schools. As Tara grew up, she watched 2 of her siblings go off to college, and as she decided that she wanted to make that leap on her own, she checked with her father and asked, "What is college?" And her father responded, and this is a quote from the book, "College is extra school for people who are too stupid to learn the first time around." So that really shows you the kind of distrust and disdain they had for higher education, not just public education, but higher education and college, despite the fact that the college that their kids went to was BYU, which is a Mormon sponsored college and run by the church. The second parallel that I found in this book was the great distrust of government. As we read about Tara's story, we learn that her parents are survivalists, which means that they stockpile supplies not just in their home, but in their basement, in a bunker. They have bug-out bags, which they can get filled with supplies, with ready-to-eat meals, with guns, with ammunition, with gas that they can use to go anywhere. They learn Morse code so that they can communicate with other people. Even Tara mentions that she found it odd that if they were the only people who were going to survive the days of abomination, or what Jehovah's Witnesses would call Armageddon, who would they be communicating with? She had questions in her mind that didn't make a lot of sense to her from the things that her parents were making her do. The distrust of government was so great that Tara and her siblings didn't have birth certificates. They didn't have official government documents. In fact, when it came time for Tara to get those documents for herself, her mother didn't even know her birthday. One of the issues that's highlighted consistently throughout the book is the fact that Tara's father believes that the FBI and the feds will come to their house and there will be a standoff. Tara goes on to believe that maybe that will happen one day, and she has vivid memories of it. Then later she finds out that this is probably because there was a standoff with one of her neighbors, or someone who lived nearby, named Randy Weaver. And if you would like to look up more information, I'll go ahead and post a link down below. But Randy Weaver was a man who had a standoff with the FBI, and there was issues that went on with that, and her father internalized this fear to believe that he was next, that the FBI was coming for him next, and that the Lord would have to provide and save them, and that their only chance for survival was to start stockpiling supplies and to trust the Lord. The next parallel between Jehovah's Witnesses and this book that I found out about was physical or emotional abuse. Now, there is a trigger warning for this book for a lot of physical abuse. It's the fact that Tara's parents were so worried with their religion and with the fact that they needed to be in good standing with the Lord. They were so busy stockpiling for the end times or the days of abomination that they continued to neglect their children, to the point where a lot of the children got very badly hurt during some of the work that they did in their father's junkyard. Tara talks about falling. She talks about her brother Luke catching fire on his leg. She talks about a car accident in which her mother decided that she wasn't going to go to the hospital after being pinned inside of a vehicle and having something called raccoon eyes as a medical condition. She didn't understand that it was a medical condition at the time. She just thought the name was funny to call her mother raccoon eyes. And later she came to find out that there was actually severe brain damage and head trauma from that injury. She talks about her brother also being in a car accident. Her brother falling and hurting his head to the point that he had a traumatic brain injury that they couldn't treat at home. All of these physical and emotional beatings that they took weren't treated at the hospital due to the distrust of the government. They refused to bring their children to the hospital and instead brought them inside the house and treated all of their injuries with essential oils and herbs that they believed would heal, because the Lord had told their mother that that was how things were done. Tara also goes on to describe that one of her brothers, Sean, after having his traumatic brain injury, became very violent and very aggressive towards her. She couldn't talk back to him in any capacity, or he would have her in a chokehold and have her head in the toilet. The abuse got so severe that Tara began to develop coping mechanisms for this abuse. Tara began to cope with the abuse in sad ways, like denying herself the fact that she was being abused, like gaslighting herself and making herself think that it was all okay, it was all a joke. Her brother didn't actually mean to hurt her. The abuse continued all the way through Tara's adulthood, and towards the end, she goes on to say that because she stood up to the abuse, her family began to shun her. And that brings us to the very last point, the biggest parallel that I saw between this book and my religion at the time was the fact that her family shunned her for going against not just their family but their beliefs. There comes a point where Tara has gotten her PhD, and she is sick and tired of her father constantly telling her that the end of times is coming and she needs to be prepared. It has been years at this point, and still nothing has happened, and she is sick of hearing it. Her father offers her a blessing. She declines the blessing. Then she is completely shunned by her family as someone who has been taken over by Satan. She is also shunned by her family because she stands up to the abuse of her brother, and she tries her hardest to come through and say he is an abusive person and needs help before he hurts anyone else. Unfortunately for her, none of her family stands with her. All of them stand with the brother, whether that be for fear or for sticking with family. It is not mentioned. The only thing that Tara mentions is that she no longer belongs to her family, and her family no longer belongs to her. At the end of the story, Tara tells us that she no longer has contact with her family due to the fact that she stood up to the abuse and she refused to continue to believe things that she knew not to be true. This was a sad development for me because at the time I was on the edge of losing my own family. This book gave me the courage to stand up for what I believe in, which is that Jehovah's Witnesses do not have the truth. Now, there are more parallels in the book. There's a lot of things that I didn't even touch on, including the fact that Tara talks about purity culture in a very passive way in the book. She remembers how wearing anything below the ankle always made her look like a harlot, made her feel like she was out of place. She remembers seeing other women dressed with short sleeve shirts and shorts and thinking that they were harlots. These are the deep things that you don't think about when you're in a cult. You just think it's normal for you to be better than everybody else. Despite everything that Tara went through, she aced her SATs, got into college, and then went on to become a PhD. She went on to one of the most prestigious schools in the world, Cambridge University, and then she wrote this book about her entire experience. Tara doesn't talk about the cognitive dissonance that went through her mind too much, except for this point. She goes on to tell the story of when they were discussing Isaiah Berlin's 2 concepts in a classroom. She was confused as she's never heard of these concepts before. Negative liberty, which is the freedom from external obstacles or constraints. An individual is free in this sense if they are not physically prevented from taking an action. And then they spoke of positive liberty. And this is the point that she makes. Positive liberty is freedom from internal constraints. The clarification she says is to have positive liberty is to take control of one's own mind, to be liberated from irrational fears and beliefs, from addictions, superstitions, and all other forms of self-coercion. She goes on to explain that she didn't know what self-coercion meant. And she went on to have to think about it and really analyze what it meant and ended up applying it to her own life. That was the moment where everything turned around and she decided to no longer self-coerce. She began to accept the fact that she had been manipulated, that she had been abused, and that she was in a destructive cult. She doesn't actually say it that way, but if you read the book, you see the transformation at the end. This is, like I mentioned, a book I recommend very highly, even if you've already left. It's a very inspiring story of a woman who did the unthinkable. So, with that, I'd like to close this out, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching. And again, if you have any recommendations for books that you would like me to talk about or review, please leave them down below. I would love to read the books that you recommend, and I will go ahead and see you next time. Until then.